Welcome, dear dreamer. And tonight, we wander into the quiet heart of Shinto Japan, a place where forests breathe like living temples, and every leaf seems to hold a memory older than any written word. In these sacred groves, the line between nature and the divine softens, and the presence of the kami lingers in the air like a gentle whisper. As we walk beneath ancient cedars and pass through weathered torii gates, the world grows still, almost thoughtful, as if the forest itself is aware of our steps. These shrine woods have watched centuries rise and fade, carrying stories in the hush of moss, the sway of branches, and the slow rhythm of light filtering through green. Before we begin, tell me, what do you usually do to fall asleep faster? Do you listen to music, stretch, pray, or just close your eyes and let the day fade away? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to read every answer. And if these journeys help you rest, feel free to subscribe so we can keep exploring these quiet worlds together. The beginnings of Shinto rise from a time before writing, before kingdoms, before Japan even had a name. In those distant ages, people lived in quiet closeness with the land, not above it, not separate from it, but woven into its seasons, its storms, its silence. Mountains towered with an air of watching presence, rivers wound through valleys as if carrying old memories, and forests whispered with unseen life. To the early people of the islands, this world was not empty. It was inhabited by spirit. It was alive. Long before shrines stood in sacred clearings, there were only trees, vast groves where the wind moved with a kind of intention. The people listened. They felt the shift of air in the branches, the hum of insects at dusk, the soft texture of moss beneath their hands. These sensations weren't just nature. They were signs. They were voices. They were the presence of the kami, spiritual beings that did not exist above the world but within it. Kami were not distant gods. They were the essence of things. A waterfall could be kami. A stone could be kami. A mountain ridge glowing with dawn light could be kami. Even an old tree, scarred by centuries yet still standing, carried a presence that stirred quiet reverence. Shinto was never created by a prophet. It had no single founder, no moment where belief began. Instead, it emerged like mist rising from water, gradually, naturally, shaped by countless generations observing the rhythms of the land. The early people believed that everything, from storms to sunlight, carried spirit. The turn of the seasons wasn't just weather, it was the movement of forces with intention. When autumn winds blew through the rice fields, they believed the fields were speaking. When spring rains dampened the soil, they felt the return of life as a sacred act. In these early generations, people didn't ask what the divine looked like. They didn't carve images or build monuments. Instead, they looked directly at the world around them. The divine was not elsewhere. It was here, in the breath of the forest, in the first snow, in the scent of pine carried by winter wind. Everything had meaning, and every natural place carried its own quiet sanctity. The people began to sense that certain locations carried stronger presence than others. A grove where light never fully dimmed. A boulder standing in a field as if placed by unseen hands. A river bend where mist always gathered. These became sacred spaces, not because people declared them holy, but because they felt the presence of the kami most clearly there. They approached these places with humility, leaving small offerings of food or woven grass, not as bribes, but as gestures of respect. They spoke softly, walked carefully, and acknowledged the unseen. As communities formed, these sacred spaces became part of everyday life. Before hunting, people offered a quiet bow to the spirits of the forest. Before planting, they asked the rice field deities for blessing. Before building a home, they asked permission from the land. The bond between humans and nature was not symbolic, it was foundational. Life depended on the land, and the land depended on being treated with respect. Over time, stories grew, stories of mountains with personalities, forests with guardians, and rivers that carried ancient wisdom. These tales were not fantasy, but a language for understanding the world. A thunderstorm was not simply lightning and rain. It was the movement of a powerful kami whose presence demanded awe. A plum tree blooming in late winter was not just a plant, but a sign of resilience, carrying spirit strong enough to defy cold. Through these perceptions, Shinto became a worldview shaped by attentiveness, gratitude, and observation. As centuries passed, these early beliefs deepened into a more organized way of understanding nature. But even as rituals and traditions developed, the core remained the same, that nature itself is divine. There is no separation between the sacred and the natural. A person entering a forest does not step away from the human world into something foreign. They are simply returning to a place where the quiet truths of life are more easily heard. In the early villages, community life followed the slow rhythm of the seasons. The people marked the passage of time not through clocks or calendars, but through the flowering of cherry trees, the cry of cicadas, the first frost on the fields. These transitions were sacred moments, reminders that the world was alive and that humans lived within its larger cycle. Shinto emerged as the language for these observations, a way to honor the invisible presence within the visible world. Before the first shrine was built, there were Shimnawa ropes, cords of twisted straw hung around sacred trees or stones, marking them as places where humans should pause and bow. These ropes did not separate people from the sacred, they reminded them to approach with respect. They marked thresholds between ordinary space and the presence of something deeper. The earliest shrines were not buildings at all. They were groves, paths, and clearings where the air felt different, where people felt watched in a gentle way, as though the land itself recognized their presence. The concept of purity also took root during these early ages. Because nature was sacred, anything that disrupted its harmony was considered impure, not morally wrong, but spiritually heavy, something that clouded the connection between humans and the kami. Water became the first purifier. People washed their hands and mouths before offering prayers, believing that flowing water carried away spiritual dust. Rainstorms were blessings, rivers carried renewal, and waterfalls were places where people stood beneath the torrent to wash away spiritual stagnation. Shinto's origins were never written, only lived. They were passed from parent to child through practice rather than doctrine, through the way one bowed before a sacred tree, through the quiet steps taken inside a forest, through the gratitude offered before a meal. It was a religion without commandments, without fear, without hierarchy. It was a way of seeing the world as a partner rather than a possession. As centuries turned, these early practices grew into a vast tapestry of traditions, but the foundation remained unchanged. Nature was not just scenery. It was spirit, it was presence. It was the source of life and the home of the divine. Every wind, every rock, every shadow carried meaning. The world was alive, and humans were simply one thread within its larger weave. In this understanding, the origins of Shinto were not a beginning, they were a recognition. A recognition that the divine had always been there, waiting in the rustle of leaves and the shimmer of light on water for humans to notice and bow with quiet reverence. As generations passed, the early people of Japan continued to live in a world shaped by mountains, rivers, and forested valleys. Their understanding of spirit deepened naturally, shaped not by scripture but by daily life. The land itself served as their teacher. Storms taught them about the strength of the kami. Blossoms taught them about the fleeting nature of existence. Rivers taught them about purification and flow. Every experience became a kind of quiet lesson, forming a worldview rooted in harmony rather than domination. In these early centuries, the landscape of the Japanese archipelago was far wilder than it is today. Dense forests covered the mountains, and the horizon was marked by peaks that seemed to rise into the clouds. Volcanoes, too, shaped the land, their eruptions offering both destruction and renewal. To the people, these forces were never random. They were expressions of living presence. When a mountain rumbled or a river flooded, it was not merely a natural event, it was the movement of a kami expressing itself. This understanding fostered a sense of humility. Humans were small, and their lives intertwined with forces far older and larger than themselves. Communities built their lives around this awareness. When the wind shifted, they paused. When a certain bird called at dawn, they took it as a sign. When rain lingered, they adjusted their routines. Nature was not a resource to be controlled, it was a partner to be read carefully and respected deeply. Over time, observation became reverence. The people began to believe that if one lived attentively, the kami would reveal their presence through subtle signs. A sudden gust of wind in a quiet grove, the unexpected bloom of a flower, or even the shape of a cloud could be interpreted as guidance. As these beliefs matured, the concept of Yaoyorozu no Kami emerged, the 8 million spirits. This number was not meant to be literal. It expressed the idea that the divine existed everywhere in countless forms. Every village had its own local kami, each tied to the specific land, water, or sky of that place. A towering cedar at the edge of a field could be revered for its age and presence. A small stone near a river might be honored because it seemed to pulse with quiet energy. The people did not question why certain places felt sacred. They simply accepted that spirit rested there. These sacred places shaped the earliest gathering spaces for ritual. Before shrines were built, people assembled at natural landmarks, a clear spring, a large boulder, or the base of a mighty tree. There they offered food, sake, or woven ornaments as tokens of gratitude. These offerings were simple, but the intentions behind them carried weight. They were expressions of respect, acknowledgements of dependence, and gestures of hope that the kami would continue to protect their villages, bless their harvests, and keep their families safe. Over time, these gatherings became more structured. As communities grew and needs changed, rituals developed to mark important moments. Planting seasons, harvest celebrations, rites of purification, and transitions of life. The people did not organize these ceremonies to please distant gods, but to align themselves with the harmony of the world around them. The belief was simple. When humans acted with sincerity and gratitude, the kami responded with protection and balance. Slowly, the natural gathering spots were marked with more intention. Large branches were draped with Shimenawa ropes to signify that the space held sacred presence. Strips of white paper, known as shide, fluttered from them, reminders of purity and the invisible world beyond sight. These markings did not create sacredness, they revealed it. They helped people distinguish ordinary space from space where the presence of a kami felt strongest. As centuries passed, the early Japanese people began to settle more permanently, forming villages and small agricultural communities. Rice cultivation, in particular, shaped much of their spiritual worldview. Water became the source of life in a literal and sacred sense. The fields depended on the careful guidance of streams and rainwater, so the people developed rituals asking the kami of water, fertility, and growth for blessing. The success of a harvest was never seen as human achievement alone. It was a partnership between people, land, water, and spirit. Because rice required careful seasonal timing, these communities observed the turning of the year with great attention. The arrival of spring was not just a change in weather, it was the return of vitality. Summer storms symbolized the strength of nature. Autumn carried gratitude for what the earth had given. Winter marked a time of reflection and purification. In this growing cycle, Shinto beliefs naturally intertwined with daily work. The people honored the forces of nature not out of obligation, but because their survival depended on it. As beliefs about kami deepened, the people began to create myths to explain the origins of the world and the forces within it. These stories did not contradict their everyday experiences, but expanded them, offering ways to articulate the mysteries they felt. They spoke of the creation of the islands, born from divine union. They describe the sun goddess Amaterasu, whose light nourished both crops and spirits. They told stories of wild deities who dwelled in mountains, rivers, and storms. These myths gave form to the invisible truths that shaped their world. That nature was not an object but a relationship, and that humans were part of a larger family of beings. Even so, Shinto remained grounded in the physical world. Myth and land were inseparable. A mountain in a story was rarely symbolic. It was a real mountain, standing in the landscape where people lived. A sacred grove mentioned in a tale often matched a grove that villagers passed every day. The stories reinforced the idea that one did not need to seek the divine far away. It was present in the world just beyond their door, waiting to be acknowledged. As trade and travel between regions increased, local practices blended. Villages shared stories, rituals, and beliefs. Certain kami became widely recognized across regions, while others remained specific to their local landscapes. Yet no matter how far Shinto spread, it retained its grounding in nature. Even as small shrines were constructed, simple wooden structures with thatched roofs, they were always placed in locations chosen for their natural power. Shrines were not built to dominate the land, but to harmonize with it. They were extensions of the sacred groves they were meant to honor. As the centuries moved forward, Shinto began to shape early Japanese identity. The people saw themselves not as rulers of nature, but as part of an interconnected web. They believed that harmony came from respecting the land, honoring its rhythms, and recognizing the presence of spirit in all things. Their approach to the environment was not utilitarian but reverent. Before cutting a tree, they offered a prayer. Before crossing a mountain pass, they bowed. Before starting a journey, they asked for safety from the kami of roads and travel. This worldview instilled a deep sense of gratitude in daily life. Meals were preceded by a moment of appreciation for the food, the water, and the farmers who labored. Seasonal festivals celebrated not just human achievements, but the land itself. Even simple routines, cleaning a home, maintaining a path, tending a garden, were seen as acts of spiritual alignment. By the time Shinto began to develop more formalized structures, its roots were already ancient. It had grown from the quiet observations of countless generations. It had risen from forest paths, riverbanks, mountaintops, and the turning of the seasons. It had been shaped not by doctrine or authority, but by the land itself. And even as it grew more complex, its foundation remained the same. A deep, enduring reverence for the natural world and the unseen forces that dwell within it. In the end, the origins of Shinto were not a beginning in the linear sense. They were a recognition that the world is alive, that spirit rests within all things, and that humans live best when they walk in quiet partnership with the land. Every forest grove, every running stream, every stone warmed by the sun carried this truth. And in acknowledging it, the people created a belief system that would endure for thousands of years, rooted in harmony, humility, and the gentle awareness that the divine is never far away. Long before cities rose or roads carved their way across the land, Japan was a country of forests. Vast stretches of green covered the islands, flowing over mountains, valleys, and coasts like a living sea. Within this great wilderness, certain groves seemed different from the rest, quieter, deeper, more aware. People felt it immediately when they stepped inside. The air cooled, sound softened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. These places were not chosen by human hands, they revealed themselves. And in time, they became known as Chinju no Mori, the sacred shrine forests that sheltered the presence of the kami. A grove became sacred not because someone declared it so, but because the people sensed something ancient in its stillness. A cluster of old cedars might stand taller than the rest, their roots gripping the earth like elder guardians. A clearing might glow with sunlight in a way that felt strangely deliberate, as if light itself were a visitor paying respect. Streams flowed through these groves with unusual clarity, their waters reflecting patterns of branch and sky like liquid mirrors. Everything felt intentional, though nothing had been built. The land spoke through silence, and the people listened. Over time, villagers began to treat these groves with reverence. They avoided cutting trees there, fearing they might disturb the spirit that dwelled within. They walked softly, spoke gently, and left offerings beneath branches or beside stones. These actions were not part of grand rituals, they were quiet gestures of gratitude. The people felt protected by these groves, sheltered during storms, guided when lost, and blessed during harvests. And slowly, the idea formed that every village needed a sanctuary, a place where the divine and the human could meet. The sacred grove became the heart of this relationship. When simple shrines were first built, they were set within these forests, not imposed upon them. The builders chose locations where the trees already formed a natural enclosure, as if nature had created the first walls and ceiling. Early shrine structures were small and humble, constructed with wood and thatch, blending softly into the green around them. They were not monuments meant to capture attention. Instead, they were doorways, quiet markers acknowledging that the grove held something greater than any human dwelling. The presence of the forest shaped every part of shrine life. The path leading to the shrine was not forced into the land, but followed the natural curve of the earth. The torii gate, often placed at the entrance to the grove, marked the transition from the everyday world to the realm where kami lived. Crossing beneath, it was a step into a different kind of time, slower, gentler, infused with the weight of centuries. Visitors felt their shoulders loosen, their breath deepen, and their awareness sharpen as soon as they entered. Within the grove, sound took on a sacred quality. Leaves rustled not randomly, but with intention. Birds called in patterns that seemed meaningful, though their language remained just beyond human understanding. Wind winding between the trees carried the faint impression of presence, not a figure, but an atmosphere, as if the kami moved not in shape, but in sensation. Even the silence carried weight, humming softly with the memory of countless prayers whispered beneath the branches. Some trees in these forests became revered as yorishiro, objects capable of attracting the kami. These trees were often centuries old, their trunks thick with age and their branches spreading outward like ancient arms. Ropes were tied around their trunks to mark their importance. Visitors might place their hands gently upon the bark, not to ask for anything grand, but simply to connect with something older and wiser. The tree, in its quiet way, became a bridge between worlds. The forest floor in these groves was never uniform. Moss-covered stones with soft green blankets, roots twisted through the soil like slow-moving rivers, and patches of ferns unfurled in delicate spirals. Even the smallest details seemed to carry quiet significance. A fallen leaf resting on a patch of moss, a drop of water sliding down a trunk, or a single beam of sunlight cutting through the canopy felt almost ceremonial. Nature itself performed the rituals, and humans participated by witnessing them. As the years passed, these forests became the center of village identity. Festivals were held not in open fields but beneath these trees. Children grew up knowing the grove as a place of protection, where they could feel the presence of ancestors and the gentle eyes of unseen guardians. Elders came to the grove to reflect, feeling the weight of time as comfort rather than burden. In this way, the forest became both memory and refuge, a living archive of community life. Yet despite their importance, these groves were never treated as sacred because of fear. The relationship between people and shrine forests was one of partnership. The land offered shelter, nourishment, and beauty. The people responded with respect, gratitude, and care. This mutual relationship formed one of the deepest principles of Shinto thought, that humans are not separate from nature, but part of its ongoing story. The forest was not a symbol, it was a relative, alive and listening. Seasons transformed the sacred groves in ways that deepened their spiritual presence. In spring, Young leaves shimmered like living light, and the scent of blossoms drifted gently through the paths. In summer, the canopy thickened into a cool refuge from the sun, its shade almost protective. Autumn filled the grove with color, each falling leaf a quiet act of offering. And winter left the trees bare, revealing the pure forms beneath, branches stretching like prayers toward the sky. Every season carried its own blessing, its own rhythm of renewal. Even as shrines grew more elaborate, the forest always remained the true sanctuary. Buildings might weather and decay, but the trees endured, growing taller with each generation. Their age alone commanded reverence. Some shrine forests sheltered trees believed to be over 1,000 years old, guardians older than entire kingdoms. Their roots reached deep into the earth, binding the present to the distant past. Visitors often felt this continuity unconsciously, the sense that the grove had watched countless lives unfold and would continue watching long after their own time had passed. In many ways, Shinto no Mori embodied the essence of Shinto spirituality better than any text or philosophy. They taught by example that sacredness comes from coexistence, that beauty lies in subtlety, and that harmony is not something to be achieved but remembered. Within these groves, people rediscovered a truth that the ancient world never forgot, that the divine does not reside far away in unreachable realms, but dwells here, in the whisper of leaves, the shape of branches, and the quiet space where the human heart listens. And so, the sacred forests endured. Even as the world changed around them, even as cities rose and roads spread across the land, these groves remained sanctuaries of stillness. They were reminders that some places must stay untouched, not for their usefulness, but for the peace they carry within them. For in the hush beneath ancient trees, people continue to feel the presence of the kami, gentle, patient, and eternal. As centuries unfolded, the sacred shrine forests deepened their role within the land, becoming not just places of worship, but living anchors for the rhythm of Japanese life. People came to understand that these groves were not simply clusters of trees, but sanctuaries where the invisible and visible worlds touched. Their quiet presence shaped how villages grew, how festivals unfolded, and how generations learned to relate to the land around them. Each grove seemed to hold its own identity, its own history, temperament, and voice, even though no human words could fully describe it. Some Shinto no Mori grew around mountain shrines, where the trees clung to steep slopes and clouds drifted through their branches like wandering spirits. In these high places, the air felt sharper, almost crystalline, and the world below appeared distant and softened. Such forests carried a sense of gentle isolation, as though they existed halfway between earth and sky. Travelers who climbed to these groves often described feeling lifted from the concerns of the world, as if each step upward brought them closer to a realm where thoughts settled and worries loosened. Other sacred forests surrounded shrines built on lowland plains, where the trees grew thick and wide, their roots woven deep into river-fed soil. These groves felt grounded, anchored by centuries of growth. Their shade carried coolness even in summer, and their leaves formed a canopy that filtered sunlight into soft patterns. Villagers often gathered here for seasonal rites, bringing offerings of rice, fruits, and woven decorations. The grove held their celebrations with a kind of quiet acceptance, a reminder that festivals were not merely human events, but shared moments between people and the spirits who lived alongside them. Many of these groves had boundaries so subtle they were recognized not by fences, but by feeling. A traveler walking along a forest road might suddenly sense a shift, a hush in the wind, a brightness in the air, or a momentary awareness of being watched with gentle curiosity. These sensations were understood as signs of entering sacred space. Even those unfamiliar with Shinto practices found themselves slowing their steps, lowering their gaze, or breathing more softly. The forest itself seemed to guide behavior, shaping reverence through presence, rather than command. Over the years, shrine caretakers developed ways of tending to these groves while preserving their natural integrity. Fallen branches were cleared only when necessary, and paths were shaped to follow the terrain rather than cut through it. Wooden structures were rebuilt periodically, not to modernize the space, but to maintain harmony with the forest's life cycle. Shrines were renewed through traditional craftsmanship that honored ancient forms, allowing the grove to remain timeless even as materials aged. Humans did not dominate the forests. They participated in their renewal, respecting the balance that sustained both nature and spirit. Some trees within the groves became especially revered due to their age or striking presence. These were known as Shinboku, sacred trees. Their trunks were often wrapped with shimenawa, signaling that a kami was believed to dwell within or near them. Visitors approached these trees with quiet steps, offering small gestures of respect. They never touched the bark without intention, and they often lingered nearby, sensing the slow pulse of life within the wood. Over time, entire communities grew around such trees, shaping local identity across generations. Water played a significant role in these sacred groves as well. Springs, streams, or pools often flowed within or near the shrine grounds, their waters believed to hold purifying power. The sound of running water mingled with the rustle of leaves, creating a natural chorus that felt almost ceremonial. In many places, the forest's water sources were carefully protected, for they were seen as lifeblood for both the grove and the kami who dwelled there. Visitors washed their hands and rinsed their mouths at purification basins fed by these springs, marking the transition from everyday life to sacred awareness. As time passed, the groves also became places of quiet refuge. During times of conflict or hardship, villagers sought shelter within their shade. The groves remained peaceful even as the world beyond shifted and strained. Stories grew around them, tales of travelers who found safety beneath their branches, or of storms that seemed to soften when they passed overhead. While these stories were never told with certainty, they reflected a shared truth, that the sacred forests offered comfort as much as spirituality. The connection between people and these groves deepened through seasonal change. In spring, the return of life was celebrated with gentle rituals, and the forest seemed to respond with bright new leaves and blossoms. In summer, the grove became a cool sanctuary, a retreat from heat and noise. In autumn, falling leaves turned the ground into a tapestry of warm color, reminding visitors of the beauty in impermanence. Winter brought the grove into a state of pure stillness, its bare branches revealing the quiet strength beneath the surface. Each season invited reflection, drawing people closer to the rhythms that shaped both nature and their own lives. Even as Japan transformed through the rise of courts, the spread of agriculture, and the growth of towns, the sacred shrine forests endured. They remained pockets of ancient time, places where modern concerns faded and the spirit of the land felt immediate and alive. Emperors and commoners alike revered these spaces, recognizing that their preservation was tied not only to tradition, but to the health of the land itself. The groves served as reminders that nature held wisdom far older than any human institution. With the passing of generations, shrine forests became symbols of continuity. Families grew, societies changed, and landscapes shifted, but the groves remained steadfast. Children played beneath their branches, elders found solace in their shade, and travelers paused to gather their thoughts within their quiet. The trees bore witness to countless lives, their rings holding stories that no human record could capture. They stood as living monuments not to power or conquest, but to harmony and endurance. In many ways, Shinju no Mori embodied the essence of what Shinto would become, a spirituality rooted not in doctrine, but in relationship. They taught that sacredness arises from attention, gratitude, and care. They reminded people that the divine does not reside in distant realms, but in the places where wind meets leaf, where shadow touches root, where light falls in quiet patterns through ancient branches. The more humans honored these truths, the more deeply the groves responded. Over time, even as modern development spread across the land, efforts were made to protect these sacred forests. Their survival became a testament to the enduring value of harmony between humanity and nature. In a world that moves quickly, they offered slow lessons. In a culture shaped by change, they preserved continuity. And in a landscape influenced by human hands, they remained places where the natural world could breathe freely. The sacred shrine forests continued to whisper their ancient truths to anyone willing to listen. They invited quiet reflection, gentle steps, and a renewed awareness of the world. Beneath their branches, people learned to sense the presence of the kami, not as distant beings, but as companions woven into the fabric of the land. And so, the groves remained, cradling the stories of centuries, offering peace to those who entered, and reminding all who stood beneath their shade that the divine is often found not in grand structures, but in the silent places where the earth remembers itself. Long before grand temple complexes rose across Japan, shrine architecture began as a quiet extension of the natural world. Early shrines were little more than small wooden structures set within sacred groves, shaped not by desire for ornamentation, but by the need to honor what already existed. Over centuries, these simple shelters gradually evolved into a distinct architectural tradition, one that reflected the belief that the divine dwelled not behind walls, but within the living landscape itself. Every beam, every roofline, and every pathway was designed to harmonize with the rhythms of nature. The approach to a shrine began long before the visitor reached the building itself. Paths were often lined with trees or stones, guiding the traveler gently through the forest or countryside. The path rarely ran straight. Instead, it curved softly, inviting the visitor to slow their steps and settle their breath. These walkways were not simply roads, they were a transition, a gradual shift from the everyday world into a space of quiet thought. As one walked, the sounds of human life faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves, the calls of distant birds, and the soft rhythm of footsteps on earth. At the threshold of sacred space stood the torii gate. Its simple form, two vertical posts supporting a horizontal beam, marked the entrance to a realm where the presence of kami was honored. The gate did not close anything off, it opened. Passing beneath, it symbolized leaving behind the noise of human concerns and entering a place where the natural and the spiritual overlapped. Torii stood not as barriers but as acknowledgements. The land ahead held deeper meaning. The architecture that followed was shaped by principles of humility and purification. Before approaching the main shrine, visitors stopped at a small area known as the Temazuya, or purification basin. Here, water flowed gently from a wooden spout into a stone basin lined with smooth surfaces. The act of rinsing hands and mouth was simple, yet carried a centuries-old understanding. To stand before the kami, one must shed the dust of daily life. The water, always cool and clear, symbolized renewal, a physical gesture that reflected an inner settling. After purification, the pathway led deeper into the shrine grounds. In many places, the path widened into a broad, open courtyard laid with gravel or packed earth. Gravel paths and courtyards served both symbolic and practical purposes. The sound of footfalls on small stones created a quiet crackling that announced one's presence without disturbing the natural calm. The cleansing of the ground by regular raking reflected the larger idea that sacred spaces required careful, continuous tending. Beyond the courtyard stood the honden, the main hall, considered the sanctum of the shrine. The honden was rarely accessible to the public. Its purpose was not to be entered, but to be honored. Built in styles that echoed ancient storehouses and dwellings, it embodied purity, simplicity, and natural materials. Its wooden beams were often unpainted, allowing the grain of the wood to show its age and beauty. The roof, traditionally thatched or covered with bark, curved gently in quiet harmony with the treetops surrounding it. Some shrines followed the oldest architectural patterns, such as the Shinmei style, characterized by straight lines, raised floors, and a roof that extended outward like a protective canopy. Others used the Taisha style, with steeply angled roofs that reached upward toward the sky. Despite their differences, all shrine buildings shared a common principle. They were constructed using natural materials that aged gracefully, inviting weathering, sunlight, and time to shape their beauty. This impermanence reflected a core Shinto truth. That change is part of all things, and that even sacred structures must breathe with the seasons. Many honden were positioned so that light touched them at specific angles during morning or evening, creating a glow that symbolized the presence of the kami. Architecture was not meant to dominate the land, but to accompany it. Roofs extended like sheltering wings. Pillars rose like trees turned into guardians. Even the smallest details, the placement of stones, the alignment of beams were arranged with care, reinforcing the connection between human craftsmanship and natural harmony. Near the honden stood the Hayden, or hall of worship, where visitors gathered to offer their prayers. Unlike the honden, the Hayden was open to all. Its design invited people to stand or kneel beneath its wide roof while facing the deeper sanctum. Candles, lanterns, and offerings filled the space with a sense of quiet reverence. The Hayden was constructed to allow wind to pass through, carrying with it the soft rustle of the surrounding forest. In this way, nature became part of the ceremony, contributing its own voice to the atmosphere of worship. Sacred boundaries within the shrine grounds were often marked by ropes, stones, or the position of trees. Shimnawa ropes, woven from rice straw or hemp, hung across entranceways or wrapped around trees and stones. These ropes did not protect the shrine from outside forces. Rather, they signaled that the space contained spiritual presence. White paper strips called shide fluttered from them, catching light and wind with small, meaningful motions. Their movement suggested the subtle activity of the unseen world. Stone lanterns stood quietly along pathways, lighting the way during festivals and ceremonies. Their soft glow illuminated both human steps and the surrounding forest, symbolizing the connection between light, life, and guidance. Moss often grew on their surfaces, softening their form and blending them further into the natural world. In shrine settings, even stone felt alive, shaped by time, touched by seasons, and holding a softness that only age could grant. Throughout the shrine grounds, nature was not merely background but central. Trees rose like pillars that predated every structure. Moss carpeted the earth in velvety layers. Streams flowed through the grounds, carrying purity and reflection. Each natural element held purpose and meaning. The shrine existed within the forest, not apart from it. This union formed the essence of Shinto architectural philosophy. The built environment should embrace the land rather than replace it. Even the smallest shrines, tucked into village corners or hidden along mountain paths, followed these principles. Their simplicity was not a sign of poverty, but of respect. They stood as reminders that sacredness does not depend on size or ornamentation, but on the sincerity of intention and the harmony between land and structure. As centuries passed, certain shrines grew larger, reflecting regional importance or deeper mythological origins. But even the grandest shrines maintained the ancient balance. Expansive courtyards, towering pillars, and intricate roofs remained grounded in the shapes of nature. The more complex the architecture became, the more care was taken to ensure it never overshadowed the presence of the forest or the mountains beyond. To walk through a shrine was to move through layers of meaning. Every step marked transition. Every structure served a purpose. Every object manifested centuries of tradition shaped by the belief that the divine lived not in distant heavens, but in the immediate world, in the trees, the water, the mountains, and the quiet air that flowed between them. Here, architecture did not enclose sacredness, it revealed it. The buildings stood as respectful gestures toward the land, offerings of craft and care, guiding humans into partnership with the spirit of the world. As the centuries turned, shrine architecture unfolded into a rich and enduring tradition, yet it never strayed from the principle that structures must exist in harmony with the land. Every feature, whether large or small, carried meaning shaped by centuries of quiet observation. Even as new techniques emerged and cultural influences flowed across the islands, shrine design remained anchored to the belief that buildings should not claim the land, but listen to it. One of the most distinctive qualities of shrine architecture was its openness. Unlike fortress-like temples or monumental buildings in other cultures, Shinto shrines welcomed the flow of wind, light, and sound. The spaces between pillars were often left open, allowing the forest to drift in. The roofs extended outward in long, sheltering sweeps, shaped to channel rain gently to the earth. Floors were raised above ground level, maintaining a respectful distance from the soil where countless roots and spirits lived. This openness reflected a spiritual truth, that the divine was not contained, but shared, moving freely through the world. As visitors walked through the shrine precincts, they encountered an arrangement of structures and natural features placed with quiet intention. The Hondan stood as the heart of the sacred space, but it was surrounded by elements that worked together like a constellation. Smaller auxiliary buildings, often dedicated to related kami or protective spirits, echoed the main shrine style in miniature form. Their placement was never symmetrical or rigid. Instead, they followed the contours of the land, aligning with slopes, streams, or clusters of ancient trees. The shrine grounds grew organically, like an extension of the forest that sheltered them. In many shrines, stone arrangements played subtle roles. Pathways lined with river stones guided the visitor's journey while blending seamlessly into the natural setting. Large stones placed near courtyards or alongside steps were not decorative, they had presence. Their shapes, textures, and positions carried a quiet dignity shaped by time. Some stones were believed to house or attract kami, their stillness serving as a point of calm within the living landscape. Moss softened their outlines over time, creating a visual harmony that reinforced the sense of antiquity and reverence. Lanterns, both stone and wooden, formed gentle trails that illuminated the shrine at night or during festivals. Their light was never harsh. It glowed softly, reflecting the deep respect for subtlety that shaped shrine design. The flame within a lantern was seen as a living symbol, carrying warmth and guidance. Its presence echoed the ancient belief that light connected the human world with the unseen. Lanterns were placed not to dominate the landscape, but to accompany it, offering quiet companionship along forest paths. The roofs of shrine buildings carried particular significance. Crafted with layered planks or thatched reeds, they were shaped with sweeping curves that echoed the natural forms of branches and hills. Beams extended beyond the walls, forming elegant crosspieces known as chigi and katsuoge. These elements, unique to Shinto architecture, pointed skyward like stylized branches reaching toward the heavens. They symbolized connection between earth and sky, between the material and the spiritual, between the passing moment and the endless flow of time. Their forms remained remarkably consistent across centuries, preserving ancient aesthetics with quiet steadfastness. Equally significant were the fences that marked shrine boundaries. Unlike defensive walls, shrine fences were often simple wooden slats or low stone lines. They did not exclude, but gently defined. Their purpose was to signal that within the boundary lay a space where attention should deepen and footsteps should soften. These fences were symbolic thresholds, guiding the visitor's awareness without imposing barriers. Beyond them, the forest often resumed its natural wildness, reminding all who entered that the shrine was only a part of a much larger sacred whole. Shrine storerooms, known as jingu, were built to house ceremonial tools, ancient documents, and treasured objects. Their construction prioritized purity and preservation. Raised foundations protected their contents from humidity, while wooden walls allowed the structure to breathe. Even these auxiliary buildings were aligned with the deeper philosophy of harmony and respect for the natural world. Throughout the shrine grounds, water remained a constant presence. Streams diverted gently, small ponds reflecting branches overhead, or springs feeding purification basins all contributed to the serene atmosphere. Water was understood as a bridge of transformation, cleansing, cooling, and renewing. The gentle sound of water moving through the shrine space created a natural rhythm that accompanied every ritual act. Even in moments of stillness, the faint trickle of a stream or drip from a mossy rock carried the sense of continuity that defined Shinto belief. Seasonal change shaped the shrine environment just as deeply as any architectural feature. The same building could feel entirely different depending on the time of year. In spring, cherry blossoms filled the grounds with pale color, their petals drifting like soft prayers across the gravel. In summer, cicada calls echoed through the air, filling the space with a hum that seemed to vibrate with life. Autumn brought fiery leaves, transforming the rooflines into islands of red and gold. Winter stripped the trees bare, revealing the clean geometry of beams and pillars against cold, clear skies. Each season revealed a different layer of meaning, reminding visitors that impermanence was a natural part of beauty. Even maintenance of the shrine was integrated into these rhythms. Thatched roofs were replaced in ceremonies that became moments of cultural importance. The act of renewal served both practical and symbolic roles. It kept the structure healthy and honored the principle that even sacred buildings must age, decay, and be reborn. Wood was polished, stones were cleaned, and pathways were raked not out of obligation but out of gratitude. Caretaking was itself a form of devotion, a way of acknowledging the presence that infused the land. The interplay between architecture and nature reached its quiet climax in the relationship between shrine and forest. The buildings never overshadowed the trees, they bowed to them. Roof lines blended with branches, and pillars echoed the vertical lines of trunks. The architecture reflected a humility born of centuries of living with natural forces. Shrines were built to coexist with earthquakes, storms, and shifting landscapes. Their light, flexible construction allowed them to move with the earth rather than resist it. This adaptability mirrored the broader Shinto belief that harmony arises from yielding, listening, and flowing with the world rather than striving to impose upon it. As the shrine grounds aged, layers of meaning accumulated like rings in a tree. The buildings weathered, darkened, and softened. Moss climbed their lower walls. Leaves gathered in corners that the wind favored. Birds nested beneath eaves. Insects hummed in shaded spaces. The shrine was not separate from the living world. It was part of its ecosystem. Every creature that passed through the grounds, from small forest animals to migratory birds, contributed to the quiet symphony of presence. For centuries, people visited shrines not only to pray but to reconnect with the world. Architecture guided them, but nature embraced them. Together, they formed spaces where the boundary between human and divine thinned until it became almost unnoticeable. Visitors left these places with a renewed sense of calm, carrying with them the knowledge that the beauty of the shrine came not from its structure alone, but from the partnership it maintained with the land. In this way, shrine architecture and symbolism preserved the oldest truth of Shinto, that the divine flows through all things, and that the role of humans is not to command the world but to honor it. Through every beam, every stone, every drop of water, The shrines whispered the same gentle message, that harmony is achieved not by shaping the world in one's image, but by allowing oneself to be shaped by the quiet wisdom of the world. Long before names were given to the gods, the land itself was already alive. Every mountain peak, every flowing river, every cluster of ancient trees held a presence that could be felt, but not seen. These presences were the kami, not gods in the distant, towering sense, but living forces woven into the world. They were the breath of the land, the pulse of the seasons, the stillness within forest shadows. In early Japan, humans did not imagine themselves separate from these spirits. They lived among them, moved with them, and shaped their lives according to their rhythms. A kami could be as vast as a mountain, or as small as a stone worn smooth by centuries of water. Some kami ruled entire regions, watching over valleys and forests with ancient patience. Others dwelled in narrow streams, quiet shrines, or even single trees whose shape or age commanded reverence. The natural world was not a backdrop, but a gathering place for these countless spirits. Each had its own temperament, presence, and influence, some gentle, some powerful, all worthy of respect. Forests were among the most sacred domains of the kami. The towering cedars and cypresses that blanketed the mountains carried a sense of age that no human structure could equal. Their trunks rose like pillars supporting the sky, and their branches whispered with an otherworldly calm. Many believed that the oldest trees served as vessels through which the kami observed the world. The quiet beneath their branches felt intentional, as though shaped by unseen hands. Entering such a forest was like stepping into a chamber of natural worship, where every sound softened and every breath deepened. Rivers and streams also served as pathways for divine presence. Their movement reflected the flow of purity and change. Water carried life to crops, fed animals, and shaped the land itself. The people recognized its sacredness instinctively. The kami of water, known collectively as suijin, were honored for their role in nurturing life and cleansing impurities. Springs hidden in forest groves were especially revered. Their waters, rising from deep within the earth, were believed to carry the essence of the underworld and the sky, uniting realms through their purity. Mountains formed another domain rich with kami. Japan's mountain ranges, shaped by volcanic forces, seemed to rise with a gravity that drew both awe and humility. These peaks served as abodes for powerful spirits known as Yama no Kami. Shepherds, hunters, and travelers approached these regions with reverence, leaving offerings at mountain passes or beneath prominent rocks. Some peaks were believed to be so sacred that only priests or hermits could approach their summits. The mountains stood not only as physical landmarks, but as spiritual axes, connecting earth to sky, human life to divine intention. Certain kami took the form of animals, or were associated with specific creatures that mirrored their nature. Foxes, for example, were linked to the kami inari, not as servants, but as embodiments of the shifting, liminal energy that accompanied growth and harvest. Birds were seen as bearers of messages, flying between realms with ease. Even insects had their place in the spiritual landscape, their seasonal rhythms echoing ancient cycles that humans learned to read and interpret. Rocks and stones possessed their own domain of spirit. Large boulders resting inexplicably in quiet fields were believed to be dwellings for powerful, silent kami. Smaller stones placed near shrines carried the memory of prayers offered over generations. The solidity of stone symbolized endurance, and many believed these kami watched over the land with unchanging attention. Some stones stood upright in sacred groves, marking the presence of kami without the need for inscriptions or carvings. Their presence alone was enough. Wind and weather also held divine significance. A sudden gust passing through a shrine grove or a shift in the scent of the air at dusk was interpreted as the movement of kami. Storms reflected powerful, roaming spirits whose temper could shape entire regions. Gentle breezes carried blessings, while cold winter winds signaled change and renewal. The people believed that by paying attention to these natural movements, they could understand the intentions of the spirits better than through any spoken prophecy. The kami were not distant rulers. They were companions woven into daily life. The people recognized them in the subtle shifts of nature: the bloom of early plum blossoms, the rustle of bamboo, the call of a crane at dawn. Each moment of beauty or strangeness held the possibility of divine presence. In this way of seeing, the world was not divided into sacred and profane. All things carried spirit, though some places made it easier to feel. Sacred spaces emerged wherever the kami were perceived strongly. A clearing might glow oddly bright after rainfall, or a stand of trees might grow in a pattern that felt purposeful. People responded by marking these locations with ropes, stones, or small wooden structures. Over time, these became shrines, not because they created sacredness, but because they acknowledged it. A shrine was a gesture of recognition, a way of saying, "Here, the invisible draws close." Kami of the land, Kunitsu Kami, governed forests, fields, mountains, and rivers. Kami of the heavens, Amatsu Kami, were linked to sky, sun, and storm. The boundary between these realms was fluid, just as water flowed into air and roots into soil. The people did not categorize these spirits rigidly. Instead, they saw them as part of a vast and interconnected family, each influencing the balance of the world in ways that humans only partially understood. Among the most cherished kami were those tied to rice cultivation. Their presence guided planting, protected fields from storms, and blessed the harvest. Rice was more than food. It was a sacred gift, the result of humans working in partnership with land and spirit. Festivals honoring these kami were woven into the agricultural calendar, celebrating the cycle of growth, gratitude, and renewal. Communities developed their own relationships with local kami. Each village had its guardian spirit, believed to protect the region and its people. Shrines honoring these kami were never far from daily life. Children grew up learning their names and offering simple prayers. Elders passed down stories explaining how the kami shaped the local landscape or watched over important events. These narratives were not mythology in the distant, grand sense. They were living relationships, kept alive through gratitude and attention. The diversity of kami was endless. Some were ancient and powerful, tied to mountains or oceans. Others were small and gentle, residing in a single tree or stream. Some were connected to ancestral spirits, embodying the memory of those who came before. Others protected paths, homes, or even daily tasks. The presence of kami gave meaning to even the smallest moments. A falling leaf, a sudden breeze, or the quiet call of an unseen bird could all serve as gentle reminders that the world was alive with spirit. As humans built their lives around these beliefs, they developed a profound sense of responsibility toward the natural world. The kami were not beings to be feared, but partners in maintaining harmony. When forests were tended with care, when water was kept pure, when respect was shown to the land, the kami responded. Harmony was a shared effort, not a demand from above. Nature flourished when humans acted with sincerity, and communities prospered when they lived with reverence. This understanding shaped the soul of Shinto spirituality. Kami were everywhere, not confined to temples or limited to specific practices. They lived in the world as it was, in mountain fog, in river currents, in wind brushing through bamboo leaves. And through this awareness, people learned to walk through life with a quiet sense of connection, knowing that the boundary between themselves and the sacred was as thin as a leaf, as soft as a shadow, as constant as the turning of seasons. As the centuries drifted across Japan's shifting landscape, the presence of the kami moved with the forests, the stones, the wind, and the quiet unfolding of seasons. Their domains did not fade with time. They only deepened, woven into the rhythm of places that learned to hold memory. Every shrine forest, every mountain ridge, Every flowing river became a vessel for the unseen, a reminder that the world always carries more than the eye can witness. The people who lived near these sacred spaces understood that to encounter the kami was not to see a form, but to sense a presence, a subtle awareness that lived within the land itself. In the stillness of the forests, the spirits of trees watched the passing years like ancient guardians. Their bark carried the imprint of countless prayers offered beneath their shade, and their roots remembered footsteps from generations long gone. Whenever the wind threaded through the leaves, it stirred the quiet breath of the kami who dwelled within, creating a moment where nature and spirit met in gentle harmony. These groves were not merely clusters of trees. They were sanctuaries shaped by reverence, places where the boundary between human life and divine presence softened until both seemed to exist in the same calm breath. Throughout the high mountains, the kami of peaks and valleys kept watch over the shifting clouds. These guardians were believed to govern storms, sunlight, and the delicate balance of seasons. Travelers who crossed mountain passes felt their presence in the low rumble of distant thunder, in the sudden clearing of mist, in the way light filtered through branches at just the right moment. The mountains carried an authority that needed no words, a quiet reminder that some realms must be approached with respect, not because they threaten, but because they endure with ancient strength. Water carried its own lineage of kami, flowing through the land like memory given motion. Rivers were seen as living pathways, their currents guiding spiritual energy through forests, across plains, and toward the sea. In the still pools where sunlight settled like floating gold, people believed the presence of gentle spirits watched from beneath the surface. Their blessings were sought for purity, safe journeys, and the quiet renewal that water brings to all life. Even in the smallest spring, the shimmer of clear water felt like an invitation to pause, to breathe, to remember the sacredness woven into the natural world. The sea, vast and restless, held its own guardians, deep, ancient forces that shaped tides and protected coastal villages. Fishermen felt them in the shifting winds and the careful pull of waves, understanding that the ocean was a realm that gave generously but demanded care. The boundary where land met water became a sacred threshold, marked by shrines that offered gratitude for safe passage and the enduring rhythm of the tides. These coastal kami were not seen as distant rulers, but as companions who watched over those who trusted the sea's unpredictable heart. In the fields that stretched across valleys and plains, agricultural kami oversaw the quiet miracle of growth. Their presence lived in the green shoots of rice, in the shimmer of morning dew, in the gentle weight of harvest. Farmers greeted the first sprouts with reverence, believing that each seed carried not just nourishment, but a blessing from spirits woven into the land. Every planting and harvest became a moment of communion, a cycle where human effort and divine grace met in shared purpose. Through these fields, the spiritual and the earthly moved together like two rivers joining into one. Even the smallest spaces, a lone stone beneath a waterfall, a moss-covered path crossing through an old grove, a hollow tree glowing with filtered sunlight, were known to shelter kami. These were not grand deities, but small presences, subtle and gentle. They inhabited the overlooked places, lending quiet harmony to the corners of the world that people passed without noticing. Those who walked slowly, those who listened carefully, often felt a shift in the air, a faint awareness that something watched with kindness rather than judgment. Over time, the relationship between people and these unseen guardians became woven into the culture itself. Festivals arose to honor the spirits of forests, fields, and rivers, each celebration timed with the seasons so that human life followed the same rhythms that guided the natural world. In spring, blossoms were welcomed as signs of renewal and the stirring of gentle kami. In autumn, the reddening of leaves marked gratitude for harvest and the turning of the year. These events were not simply rituals, they were acknowledgments of coexistence, the way nature and humanity moved through the world together. As villages grew around shrines, the presence of the kami shaped community life. Paths were laid to avoid disturbing sacred trees, and buildings were arranged so that sunlight might fall upon shrine gates at certain times of day. Even the placement of homes and fields often followed the natural flow of land believed to be influenced by benevolent spirits. Instead of bending nature to human will, communities learned to live by its contours, trusting that harmony with the unseen would bring peace and prosperity. In remote forests where human steps were rare, the kami grew especially strong. These places carried an atmosphere unlike any other, a woven silence filled with a kind of ancient attention. Moss softened every stone, leaves muffled every sound, and the air held a depth of stillness that made the world feel paused between breaths. These were the sacred groves that survived untouched by time, their existence preserved because people knew that entering without purpose disrupted the delicate balance of spirit and place. Such forests were left to breathe freely, watched over by guardians with roots older than memory. The connection between kami and nature became a way of seeing the world, a recognition that everything carried both physical form and spiritual presence. Mountains were more than peaks, they were living beings. Rivers were more than water, they were flowing spirits. Trees were more than wood, they were silent deities standing watch over generations. In this worldview, every piece of the land deserved respect because every piece held life in its own way. The world was not a collection of objects, but a network of beings, each supporting the other. Even as centuries passed and modern life emerged, these beliefs remained, not as rigid doctrines, but as quiet undercurrents in the culture. People continued to approach certain trees with reverence, to bow at torii gates before stepping into shrine grounds, to cleanse their hands in cool water before offering silent wishes. These acts were gentle reminders that nature still held its spirits, still whispered its presence, still offered moments of peace to anyone who paused long enough to notice. Through all these realms, the kami continued to move without form, their presence carried in wind, sunlight, shadow, and silence. They remained woven into the world not as distant figures, but as part of the land itself. Guardians of forests, protectors of rivers, keepers of mountains, companions of growing fields. Their domains were not separated from human life. They intertwined with it, shaping the quiet fabric of a culture that had always believed nature itself could listen. In the heart of every shrine forest, in the stillness beneath ancient branches, their presence lingered like a breath that never faded. It was a reminder that even in a world that changes endlessly, the sacred remains, resting patiently in the places where earth, spirit, and memory meet. In the quiet sanctuaries of Shinto, rituals were born not from demands of doctrine, but from the soft rhythms of the natural world. They rose like breath from the land itself, shaped by wind along the coasts, rain drifting over rice fields, and the slow turning of the seasons. In the earliest eras, before shrines were shaped from timber and stone, people performed these acts beneath open sky, guided by instinct and reverence rather than written rule. Purification, offerings, and the honoring of renewal were movements as natural as the cycle of dawn and dusk. The idea of purity was never about judgment or moral burden. It was about returning to harmony. As the people lived close to rivers, forests, and soil, they understood how easily the heart could grow heavy with the dust of daily life. To wash, to cleanse, to step lightly again, these gestures reflected the ebb and flow of the world around them. Purification was a reminder that each person carried a spark of the same quiet essence that shaped mountains and stirred the sea. To be clean in spirit was to hear the voice of the kami more clearly. Water became the first sacred medium. In streams running cold from the mountains, in basins carved from stone, in rainfall that softened the earth, people found renewal. They rinsed their hands and mouths with deliberate calm, letting the coolness ease their thoughts. Even the soft sound of dripping water held spiritual weight. It linked the mortal world to the unseen, carrying away what clouded the heart. Forest shrines placed their basins under spreading branches, allowing the light to shimmer on the surface. In this way, purification was both an inward act and an outward communion with nature. Fire, too, carried significance. Where water washed away heaviness, fire transformed it. In early rituals, small flames flickered beneath the twilight, tended with care. Their glow represented the gentle presence of the divine, warm enough to comfort, never wild enough to consume. The people believed that within flame resided a quiet clarity, capable of illuminating what needed to be relinquished. To watch a flame at dusk was to settle the mind, letting unnecessary burdens drift like smoke into the air. As agricultural life deepened, rituals became tied to seasonal change. Planting, harvesting, and the periods between were moments of profound awareness. Before seeds touched the soil, offerings were placed upon simple wooden stands, grains, fruits, sake, or the first leaves of spring. These were not gifts meant to appease distant gods, they were acknowledgments of partnership. The land provided, but only through balance, patience, and respect. To offer was to remember that nothing grown by human hands emerged without the guidance of forces older than time. In spring, ceremonies welcomed new life. Soft winds carried the scents of blossoms, and shrine maidens prepared dances that flowed like petals drifting through air. These dances, known as kagura, were shaped by slow movements, gentle turns, and quiet gestures meant to honor the unseen presence surrounding them. Their rhythm echoed the world's own awakening, a reminder that beauty arrives not through force, but through growth and light. Summer brought rites of protection. The air grew heavy, storms gathered along distant mountains, and communities turned to the kami for guidance and safekeeping. Paper streamers fluttered along shrine paths, catching light like small fragments of cloud. The people believed each strip of paper held their unspoken hopes, wishes carried upward by wind. These were simple expressions, but sincerity gave them weight. In their fluttering, the breeze became a gentle messenger between the human world and the divine. Autumn ceremonies honored gratitude. When rice fields turned golden and shadows lengthened, the first fruits and grains were offered back to the earth. Shrines glowed softly as lanterns lined their paths, reflecting the fading warmth of the season. Priests moved with slow precision through their duties, their garments stirring like falling leaves. In these acts, the people remembered that life is a cycle. One season's abundance becomes the next season's seed. Gratitude ensured the circle remained unbroken. Winter brought quiet rituals of rest. Snow muffled the forests, leaving shrines wrapped in stillness. In that stillness, purification held deeper meaning. Cold water from the mountains reminded worshippers of resilience, while fire lit in the inner sanctuaries symbolized the promise of eventual renewal. The silence of winter was never viewed as absence. It was a gathering of strength, a settling of the world before spring would rise again. Through this calm, people felt closer to the kami who lived within the quiet spaces of nature. Throughout all seasons, offerings stood at the heart of practice. Food, sake, salt, branches of evergreen, each object carried intention, given with humility. The act of offering was never measured by scale, but by sincerity. Even a small handful of rice, placed with care, held the weight of devotion. These gestures were reflections of the belief that humans and the kami existed in a relationship of mutual respect. Offerings were not demands, they were acknowledgments of presence, gratitude, and hope. Music often accompanied these rites, though it was never grand or overwhelming. Flutes, drums, and bells created tones that blended softly with wind and leaves. Their sound was meant to guide the spirit gently, not to impress or dominate. Each tone lingered briefly in the air before dissolving back into the natural world. In this way, sound mirrored the flow of life, rising, fading, and returning to stillness. Purification, offerings, and ceremonies shaped not only spiritual practice, but daily life. The values they carried, balance, gratitude, simplicity, guided communities in their relationships with each other and the land. In a world where the divine dwelled everywhere, every action held meaning. Stepping into a shrine forest was not an escape from the world, but a reminder of how deeply one belonged to it. These early rituals formed the foundation for a tradition that has endured through centuries. Their echoes remain in modern ceremonies, kept alive by those who still walk beneath the cedar trees and bow before stone basins filled with cold, clear water. In every season, the quiet conversation between humans and the natural world continues, shaped by the same principles that guided the first worshippers thousands of years ago. Across centuries, the rituals of Shinto deepened in detail, but never lost their early softness. Even as shrines grew more structured and communities expanded, the heart of each ceremony remained tied to nature's quiet rhythms. Worship was not performed to command blessings, but to remain in harmony with the unseen presence that flowed through forests, rain, and wind. In every rite, there was a reminder that life was a shared journey with the kami, shaped by reverence rather than fear. Purification, known as Hari, continued to serve as the threshold into sacred space. It carried the understanding that every person walked through the world collecting layers of unseen dust, not sin, but fatigue, worry, or heaviness. At shrines tucked beneath cedar canopies, worshippers approached the basins with steady breath. Water cupped briefly in the hands became a gentle return to clarity. As it slipped through fingers, the world felt lighter, and the path felt clear once again. Even the sound of water settling into stone invited a sense of renewal. Some rites used larger flows of water. At coastal shrines, groups stood at the shoreline before sunrise, feet buried in cold sand, letting waves wash over them in slow rhythm. At mountain shrines, streams tumbling from hidden springs became pathways to purification. Standing within those waters was not an act of endurance, but of listening. The cold taught stillness. The movement taught acceptance. The water's path resembled life itself, constantly shifting, always finding a way forward. Purification extended beyond water. Salt carried cleansing power in many ceremonies, its grains placed at entrances, sprinkled along thresholds, or arranged in small mounds that symbolized protection. Wind chimes crafted from metal and glass were hung beneath eaves, letting breeze become a purifier through sound. Even sweeping the shrine paths at dawn was part of this ongoing renewal. Every gesture, however small, was a reminder that the sacred thrives where care is given. As rituals grew in complexity, festival days knitted communities together. Seasonal ceremonies became markers of time, guiding people through the turning year. Each festival honored not only the kami but the changing world around them. Spring festivals unfolded beneath blossoms and soft rain. Summer festivals glowed with lantern light. Autumn ones brought gratitude in the scent of harvested grain. Winter rites settled like quiet snow over the land. In spring, the world awakened in delicate hues. At shrines surrounded by cherry trees, petals drifted like soft snow. Offerings reflected the season's gentleness, young herbs, fresh leaves, and water drawn from newly thawed springs. Priests carried branches of sakaki evergreen leaves representing the bridge between human and divine. Children wore light garments patterned with blossoms. Communities prayed for the health of crops and the safe passage of storms. Everything was touched by a sense of beginning, echoing the new life rising from soil and stream. Summer brought intensity, bright sun, warm nights, deep green forests filled with cicada songs that rose like a mantra. Ceremonies of protection took place during these heated months. Tall bamboo poles decorated with paper strips swayed along the shrine paths. Each strip carried a wish or a prayer for safety. Paper boats released into rivers carried hopes downstream. Bells rang at midday, scattering misfortune like dust chased by wind. The air felt charged with energy yet balanced by ritual calm. Autumn festivals embraced gratitude. As fields ripened and forests shifted to amber and gold, communities offered rice, chestnuts, persimmons, and grains. Lanterns lined walkways, their warm glow echoing the soft decline of daylight. The rituals of this season felt especially reflective, a recognition that the earth had given generously once again. The people bowed not from obligation, but from knowing their lives depended on the fragile cooperation between sky, soil, and time. Winter ceremonies were more subdued, shaped by stillness rather than celebration. Snow muffled the forest shrines, turning the air into something gentle and crystalline. Winter purification held a deeper resonance. Cold water sharpened the senses, reminding worshippers of resilience. Small fires were lit within the shrine grounds, their light representing not destruction but endurance. The world slept, yet within that sleep was the promise of renewal. Each season also shaped the dances performed within shrine grounds. Kagura evolved across generations, its movements echoing stories carried by wind and river. The dance was slow, deliberate, like the shifting of shadows beneath leaves. The tapping of small drums and the distant echo of flutes wove through the air as priestesses performed gestures that symbolized offering, gratitude, or connection. The dances were not for spectacle. They were offerings themselves, movements given to the kami with quiet devotion. Ritual music played a central role. Flutes carved from bamboo released soft notes that drifted like morning fog. Hand drums pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm, steady and grounding. At times, bells chimed in patterns that mirrored falling rain. The music was meant to harmonize with the landscape, not overpower it. Every note acknowledged the presence of the divine woven into soil, wind, and water. The reading of Norito, ritual prayers, was another pillar of Shinto ceremonial life. These prayers were recited in measured cadence, their words carrying a sense of timeless continuity. The tones were steady and gentle, reflecting the humility of their purpose. They were invitations rather than commands, spoken with the understanding that the kami listened through subtlety rather than grandeur. Seasonal ceremonies also strengthened communities. Food shared after rituals became part of the spiritual experience, not indulgence, but communion. Rice cakes shaped by many hands, tea poured carefully into small cups, fruits gathered from nearby trees, each offering carried the warmth of shared purpose. Families passed traditions to children simply by having them present, letting them see how reverence was woven into daily life. Shinto was not taught through doctrine, but through participation. Even modern festivals retain this quiet foundation. Though some celebrations now draw crowds and vibrant displays, the heart of the tradition remains rooted in ancient practices. Purification, offering, gratitude, seasonal awareness. These movements continue to shape the spiritual landscape of communities across Japan. The shrines stand not as reminders of the past, but as living spaces where the present meets the eternal rhythm of nature. As rituals evolved, they held fast to the belief that the divine resides not in unreachable heavens, but in every leaf, stream, and moment lived with sincerity. The ceremonies were not about perfection. They were about presence, being aware of the wind, the changing seasons, the breath taken before offering a prayer. Through this awareness, each person found their own quiet path toward harmony. In this way, Shinto ceremonies became reflections of the world's own shifting rhythm. They invited worshippers to slow their pace, to listen, to recognize the sacred woven into everyday life. And in doing so, they preserved something timeless. The understanding that connection with the divine begins with gentleness, continues through gratitude, and endures through respect for the earth that holds all things. Within the forest shrines of Shinto, priesthood emerged not as a profession, but as a quiet calling, shaped over centuries by those who felt drawn to the stillness between cedar trunks and the soft presence of the kami. In the earliest eras, there were no elaborate ranks, no strict hierarchies. The first caretakers were simply individuals who lived close to the land and understood its rhythm. They tended sacred groves, cleared paths where moss had grown thick, and offered grains or fruit with steady hands. Their work was not ceremonial grandeur, but daily devotion, a life lived in harmony with the sacred breath of nature. As shrines grew into central places of community life, the role of the priest took clearer shape. These caretakers became known as kanashi, the ones who served the gods by maintaining cleanliness, order, and connection. Their responsibilities expanded gently, like a stream finding its course through the woods. They learned the movements of ritual, the chanting of Norito, and the proper ways to care for sacred tools. Yet even as their duties grew, their essence remained rooted in humility. A priest was not a figure of authority, but a bridge, one who lived close enough to stillness that others could follow. The forests surrounding the shrines guided the spirit of the priesthood. To serve within those groves was to understand the importance of quiet observation. A priest noticed the subtle change in the scent of the air before rain arrived, the way the shadows shifted with each season, the slow growth of pine needles over years. In such awareness, the divine became easier to sense. Every rustle of leaves and ripple of water carried an unspoken teaching, that nothing is separate from the sacred, and everything exists in relationship. Training for the priesthood was shaped not by academic rigor, but by attentiveness. Young apprentices learned to sweep the stone paths in long, unbroken motions. They learned to fold white garments with care, to tie ritual ropes of rice straw, to prepare offerings that reflected the season. These tasks were simple, but they taught patience and mindfulness. Over time, apprentices came to understand that each act, no matter how ordinary, contributed to the harmony of the sacred space. In these shrines, spiritual preservation began with physical care. As Shinto rituals became more structured, priesthood expanded into distinct roles. Some priests specialized in reciting prayers, their voices steady and rhythmic. Others tended the forests, ensuring that sacred groves remained untouched by needless clearing. Some learned the arts of kagura, the ceremonial dances performed to welcome the kami. Still others became keepers of records, preserving the lineage of shrines and the stories carried across generations. Yet regardless of specialization, each priest shared the same guiding principle: to uphold harmony between humans and the world they inhabited. Alongside the priests stood the Miko shrine maidens who carried their own quiet legacy. Traditionally dressed in flowing white and red, they embodied purity and movement. Their presence added balance to the shrine's atmosphere, serving as attendants in ceremonies and caretakers of rituals tied to dance and music. In earlier times, Miko were believed to serve as channels through which the unseen world could be felt. As centuries passed, their role softened into symbolic presence, yet their importance remained. They sustained traditions through graceful acts of service, keeping rituals alive with their steady, gentle rhythm. In many temples, the relationship between priests, Miko, and the natural environment formed a living triangle of spiritual preservation. The forests fed the rituals with presence. The priests maintained the sanctity of the space. The Miko carried the emotional tone of devotion. Together, they formed an ecosystem of care that sustained the shrine not only physically, but spiritually. This subtle cooperation allowed Shinto to endure through eras of change without losing its foundational harmony. The lands surrounding the shrines required as much attention as the ceremonies themselves. Forest management became a sacred duty. Fallen branches were cleared in a way that honored the natural cycle. Streams flowing toward the shrines were kept pure, their banks protected from erosion. Old trees were allowed to fall naturally and decompose, feeding the soil that nurtured younger ones. To care for the forest was to care for the kami, who dwelled not above but within those living roots. In this way, priests became guardians of environmental balance long before the existence of such concepts. Many shrine caretakers approached their duties with a sense of timeless continuity. They knew they were part of a chain stretching back countless generations. Their hands swept the same stones their predecessors had touched. Their voices recited prayers shaped by centuries of repetition. Their bodies walked the same paths carved through the forest by pilgrims who had come seeking peace hundreds of seasons earlier. This connection to lineage did not weigh heavily. It sustained them, giving their work a calm and steady meaning. As Japanese history unfolded through war, reconstruction, shifting eras, and political change, the shrines endured as quiet refuges. Priesthood became a form of cultural preservation. Through every challenge, these caretakers continued to maintain rituals, teach young apprentices, and protect sacred groves. When old buildings fell to time, they rebuilt them with respect for original forms. When forests thinned from storms, they replanted with patience, knowing that their work might not fully blossom within their own lifetimes. Their devotion stretched across decades, guided by long trust in cyclical renewal. Priests also became stewards of memory. They preserved local lore, stories of specific kami, and histories of communities that grew around shrine grounds. Even when literacy expanded and modern education reshaped the country, priests continued to transmit oral traditions that might otherwise have faded. These included tales of mountain spirits, guardians of streams, and ancestral protectors. Though subtle, these narratives gave emotional depth to the rituals performed under cedar branches. Modernization brought new challenges to the shrines, particularly as cities expanded and rural communities thinned. Yet across the country, priests continued to uphold the quiet rhythm of Shinto. Many adapted by opening their grounds to visitors seeking tranquility. Others renewed their focus on environmental stewardship, turning ancient practices into contemporary conservation efforts. Their role evolved, yet the essence remained unchanged. They served as guardians of spaces where the sacred and natural remained intertwined. Even today, the sight of a priest sweeping a shrine path at sunrise holds a kind of timeless clarity. The gesture reflects centuries of repetition and echoes the earliest days when caretakers tended groves long before buildings rose. Through such simple acts, the entire spiritual tradition continues to breathe, not through grandeur, but through consistency, patience, and quiet intention. Priesthood in Shinto is a reminder that spiritual preservation is not dramatic. It is slow, deliberate work, maintaining a forest, preparing an offering, calming the mind with each step taken along a moss-softened path. In this manner, generations have kept Shinto alive, not through force or persuasion, but by honoring the natural world that first inspired its rituals. Their legacy is one of gentle endurance, a calm thread woven through centuries of change, always returning to the forest, always returning to the quiet presence of the kami. As the centuries unfolded, the work of Shinto priests deepened beyond ritual. Their stewardship became a living thread connecting the land, the community, and the rhythm of the kami. In forest shrines where light filtered down through dense canopies, the role of the priest was inseparable from the landscape itself. Every step upon the mossed stones, every stroke of the broom at dawn, every careful offering placed upon a wooden altar shaped the continuity of a tradition that moved as gently as the wind through cedar branches. Priests became the quiet archivists of the sacred. The shrines entrusted to them were not only places of worship, but repositories of cultural memory. Within wooden storehouses, documents were preserved that recounted the stories of local gods, the origins of festivals, and the lineages of those who had served the shrine before them. These archives were not grand collections meant to impress the world. They were humble guardians of continuity, ensuring that even the smallest rituals endured unbroken across generations. The forests themselves grew into living records under priestly care. Ancient trees, towering cedars, broad pines, and weathered oaks, were tended with reverence. Some stood for hundreds of years, their trunks twisted with age, their roots gripping the soil like hands holding the past in place. Priests understood that these trees were not merely natural monuments, but companions to the kami, vessels of spiritual presence. To lose one was to lose a piece of history. And so, they protected them through storms, disease, and the slow erosion of time, tending each grove as if it were a shrine unto itself. Cultural preservation also unfolded in the rhythms of the festivals that filled the shrine grounds throughout the year. Each ceremony carried echoes of all those performed before it. The priests prepared seasonal offerings with the same care as their predecessors, ensuring that community rituals shifted gently with time while remaining anchored in tradition. These festivals were more than celebrations. They were anchors of identity, moments when communities gathered beneath the trees to remember their shared heritage. Through the steady hands of the priests, every drumbeat, bell tone, and lantern glow merged past and present into a single thread of continuity. The role of the Miko, the shrine maidens, carried its own weight in the preservation of cultural life. Their movements, dances, and rituals were shaped by centuries of discipline, each gesture a continuation of teachings passed from one generation to another. Their dances were not performances, but expressions of reverence, physical prayers offered to the kami. Through their presence, the emotional and aesthetic heart of shrine tradition remained intact. Even in modern times, their movements draw from the same foundations established long ago, keeping the spirit of ancient devotion alive in subtle, graceful shifts. In many shrines, priests also tended the physical structures with careful attention to tradition. Buildings were maintained using traditional architectural methods, ensuring that repairs reflected the old forms. Torii gates were rebuilt in the same proportions, the same colors, the same quiet dignity. Thatched roofs were renewed using techniques learned from elders, and wooden beams were polished until they gleamed softly beneath lantern light. This preservation was more than repair. It was a form of devotion, acknowledging that the shrine's architecture was part of its soul. Conservation extended outward into the surrounding communities. Priests often played key roles in teaching younger generations about the sacred forest, helping children understand why certain groves must remain untouched or why offerings should be placed with gentle hands. School groups visited shrines to learn the meaning of rituals, the importance of respect for nature, and the way each ceremony reflected the cycles of the seasons. Through education, the priests ensured that the values of Shinto were shared not as doctrine, but as a living way of being. Modern times brought new challenges. Urbanization, pollution, and shifting cultural priorities placed pressure on sacred landscapes. Yet priests adapted with quiet determination. Some shrines created forest restoration initiatives, inviting community members to plant new trees, clear invasive growth, or restore walking paths. Others developed programs to protect the water sources that fed shrine basins and streams, ensuring that purification rites remained tied to clean and living water. In this way, ancient responsibilities transformed into modern environmental stewardship. Even the act of maintaining silence became a form of preservation. In a world filled with noise and constant motion, shrine priests guarded the rare spaces where quiet could still be felt. The forest paths remained places of soft breath and stillness, shaped by centuries of careful tending. Visitors stepped lightly, sensing that the calm was not accidental, but cultivated through generations of dedicated hands. Priests understood that silence was not emptiness, it was presence, a container for the sacred to be felt. As the role of priesthood expanded into the contemporary era, Their responsibilities came to include balancing tradition with accessibility. Many shrines opened their grounds to travelers seeking solace. Priests guided visitors through rituals with gentle instruction, allowing even those unfamiliar with Shinto to participate in purification, offering, and silent prayer. This sharing of practice did not dilute tradition, it strengthened it, ensuring its relevance in a changing world. Beyond rituals and environmental care, priests functioned as guardians of intangible values: respect for nature, gratitude for life, mindfulness in daily actions. These ideals shaped their work as deeply as any ceremony. Through their conduct, they embodied a worldview where divinity was not above but within the natural world. Their presence reminded communities that spirituality thrived not in grand proclamations, but in quiet actions made with sincerity. In some shrines, aging priests stood as the last carriers of local traditions. Their steps were slow, but their devotion remained steady. They remembered stories no longer written, rituals no longer widely practiced, and paths long faded beneath new growth. Their lives were woven into the temple grounds. They had swept the same stones through countless seasons, watched the same trees endure storms, and tended the same altars where generations had prayed. With each small task, they carried forward all that had been entrusted to them. Through these individuals, Shinto priesthood became a long river of continuity. It flowed around obstacles, shifted with time, but never ceased its slow, gentle movement. Every sunrise that illuminated a shrine roof, every breeze that stirred the sacred woods, every visitor who bowed before a quiet altar was part of a living lineage shaped by centuries of caretaking. In the end, the work of the priesthood was not defined by ceremony alone. It was the steady preservation of harmony between people and land, between past and present, between the visible world and the unseen one. Their devotion kept alive the understanding that spirituality is woven into the earth itself, present in each rustling branch and each pool of still water. Through their quiet guardianship, the sacred forest shrines remained places of true refuge, where the breath of the kami could still be felt in the gentle movements of the natural world. In the quiet hours when dusk drifts into night, the forest shrines of Japan seem to breathe in their own patient rhythm. The pathways soften under the dim light, the branches settle into gentle silhouettes, and the world leans toward a stillness older than memory. It is here, in these moments between light and shadow, that the legacy of the shrine forests reveals itself most clearly. Not as something preserved only in rituals or written records, but as a living presence that continues to shape the way people move through the world, teaching them without urgency, guiding them without words. The shrines have always endured through calm persistence rather than dramatic change. Their strength lies not in towering walls or guarded treasures, but in the delicate harmony between wood, stone, and leaf. Over centuries, storms have swept across mountains, kingdoms have risen and faded, and seasons have turned countless times, yet the grove remains. Trees grow and fall, moss spreads and recedes, water pools and evaporates, but the essence holds. It is an endurance shaped by cycles rather than permanence, by renewal rather than resistance. Walking through such a shrine forest feels like entering a space where time softens its grip. The air carries a scent that belongs to no single season, part earth, part cedar, part memory. Here, shadows move slowly across weathered beams, and the sound of leaves brushing against each other becomes a gentle reminder that life continues even in stillness. In this place, the spiritual and the natural coexist so seamlessly that one cannot tell where the presence of the kami ends and the breath of the forest begins. The legacy of these shrines rests not only in their architecture or rituals, but in how they shape the human spirit. Generations have visited them seeking clarity, comfort, gratitude, or simply a moment of quiet. Each visitor leaves behind something subtle, a softened thought, a gentler breath, a quieter step, and the forest absorbs these traces as easily as morning mist. Over centuries, this exchange builds a collective memory, turning the shrine into a vessel that carries the emotional imprint of countless lives. It is a remembrance shaped not by what is spoken, but by what is felt. The presence of the kami remains woven into this silent lineage, not as distant figures removed from the world, but as companions who dwell in the rustling of bamboo, the rise of morning light, the coolness of stream water flowing across smooth stones. Their influence is gentle, guiding rather than commanding, reminding all who come that the sacred resides within the smallest elements of existence. This belief, passed through centuries, has shaped a worldview where reverence grows not from fear, but from awareness. In recognizing the spirit within nature, people are drawn to treat the world with care and humility. Through wars, technological change, and shifting cultural landscapes, the shrine forests have remained untouched sanctuaries. Their continued presence serves as a quiet anchor amid the movement of modern life. Even those who do not practice Shinto find solace in their shaded paths. The shrines offer a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of time loosen, to listen to something older than human noise. In this way, the legacy of the shrine forests reaches far beyond religious practice. It becomes a refuge for anyone seeking steadiness in an ever-changing world. The teachings held in these forests do not appear as instructions or commandments. Instead, they reveal themselves through experience. The feeling of cold water during purification, the warmth of lantern light during festivals, the shifting patterns of wind as it moves through branches. These simple sensations carry lessons deeper than any spoken doctrine. That life is cyclical, that beauty grows from balance, that quiet is not emptiness, but presence. Those who visit the shrines carry these understandings back into their daily lives, allowing the spirit of the forest to ripple outward in subtle ways. The priests and shrine maidens who tend these spaces play a role in sustaining this legacy, yet even they know that their work is only part of something larger and older. They sweep leaves not to impose order, but to honor the relationship between human hands and natural rhythms. They light candles not to summon the divine, but to acknowledge its constant presence. Their devotion adds to the continuity of tradition, but the forest itself remains the true guardian of the shrine's heart. Its endurance, shaped by centuries of growth and renewal, ensures that the teachings of Shinto remain alive even as the world changes. In many ways, the shrine forests endure because they exist beyond the urgency of human life. Trees grow slowly, water flows steadily, stones weather at their own pace. Nothing within the forest hurries, and in this lack of haste lies their power. When people enter the shrine grounds, their own pace naturally slows. Breath deepens, thoughts settle. The forest draws them into its rhythm, teaching them to see the world not as a sequence of demands, but as a series of gentle cycles, each one part of a greater whole. The legacy of the forest shrines also persists through the changing seasons. Spring brings blossoms that drift across gravel like brief moments of joy. Summer saturates the air with life, filling every corner with sound and color. Autumn drapes the shrine in shades of amber and crimson, offering a reminder that beauty often arrives at the edge of change. Winter quiets everything beneath blankets of cold air, leaving the shrine in a contemplative stillness. Each season adds another layer to the shrine's memory, reinforcing the understanding that transformation is the natural rhythm of the world. Ultimately, the forest shrines of Shinto Japan endure because they ask nothing and offer everything. They stand quietly, inviting all who enter to experience a connection that requires no explanation. Through their trees, their streams, their stillness, they remind visitors that the divine is not found in grand declarations, but in the gentle ways life moves through the world. And in this recognition, a sense of peace emerges, not fleeting, but enduring, like the slow growth of cedar trunks reaching toward the sky. As night settles fully over the shrine and the sounds of the forest soften into a low, steady hush, the legacy of these sacred groves rests in the space between breath and silence. It is a legacy of quiet reverence, of harmony, of patient stewardship. And though centuries will pass, though the world will shift and change, the spirit of these places will continue to flow through each root, each stone, each flicker of lantern light. The shrine forests will endure as they always have, not through power, but through gentleness, offering their calm presence to anyone who steps beneath their branches and listens. In the quiet of sacred groves, even footsteps seem hesitant. The trees rise like guardians carved from living time. Pass beneath their shadows, and the air cools with meaning. Venture on, and you may sense a presence that has always been.